Emma Park stood at the altar of St. Mary's Cathedral, her hands trembling as she held a bouquet of white peonies and baby's breath that she had arranged herself. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across her ivory silk wedding dress that had taken her months to save for. 200 guests filled the pews behind her, their whispered conversations creating a gentle murmur of anticipation. At 28, Emma had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl. She owned a small flower shop in downtown Seattle, and every wedding arrangement she created had been practiced for her own special day. Her fiancé, David Chen, was supposed to be the love of her life, the man who had promised to build a future with her after 3 years of dating. The church was decorated with Emma's own floral creations, cascading arrangements of white roses, eucalyptus, and delicate baby's breath that she had worked on until midnight the previous evening. Every detail was perfect, from the satin ribbon on her bouquet to the pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Emma's heart raced as she waited for David to appear at the altar. The wedding was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock, and it was now 15 minutes past the hour. The minister, Reverend Williams, gave her an encouraging smile, but she could see concern beginning to creep into his eyes. Behind her, Emma could hear the guests becoming restless. Her best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, squeezed her hand reassuringly, but Emma noticed the worried glance Sarah exchanged with Emma's mother in the front row. David's best man, his brother Michael, had disappeared 10 minutes earlier, presumably to check on the groom. Emma tried to maintain her composure, telling herself that David was probably just nervous or dealing with last-minute preparations. But deep in her heart, a cold dread was beginning to form. Chapter 2. The Devastating Truth. Michael returned to the altar with a pale face and shaking hands, carrying an envelope with Emma's name written in David's familiar handwriting. The sight of the letter made Emma's stomach drop, and she felt the blood drain from her face as Michael approached with obvious reluctance. "Emma," Michael said quietly, his voice barely audible above the growing murmur of confused guests. "David asked me to give this to you." With trembling fingers, Emma opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. David's words hit her like physical blows as she read his hastily scrawled explanation. He had realized he wasn't ready for marriage, that he needed time to figure out his life, and that he was sorry but couldn't go through with the wedding. The letter was brief, cold, and devastating in its casual cruelty. David wrote that he had left town and wouldn't be returning anytime soon. He offered no real explanation, no acknowledgement of the humiliation he was causing her, and no consideration for the months of planning and the money spent on their wedding. Emma's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the letter. The church fell silent as word spread through the congregation that the groom wasn't coming. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes on her, filled with pity, shock, and uncomfortable curiosity. Sarah immediately moved to Emma's side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders as Emma's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had spent hours perfecting that morning. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Sarah whispered, her own voice thick with emotion and anger at David's cowardice. Emma looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her. Family members who had traveled from across the country, friends who had taken time off work, colleagues from the floral industry who had come to celebrate with her. The weight of their sympathy and the magnitude of her public humiliation threatened to crush her. Reverend Williams stepped forward, clearly struggling with how to handle the unprecedented situation unfolding in his church. Chapter 3. An Unexpected Presence. Among the crowd of shocked guests, one man sat quietly in the back pew, observing the unfolding tragedy with intense focus. Alexander Kim, 34 years old and CEO of Kim Industries, one of Seattle's most successful tech companies, had not been invited to the wedding. He had come to the church for reasons he couldn't entirely explain to himself. Alexander had discovered Emma's flower shop 6 months earlier when his assistant had ordered arrangements for a corporate event. He had been immediately struck by the artistic beauty of her work and had found excuses to visit the shop several times, always maintaining the pretense of business while secretly hoping to catch glimpses of the talented florist who created such beautiful arrangements. Emma had always been professional and friendly during their brief interactions, but Alexander had sensed a kindness and authenticity in her that was rare in his world of corporate dealings and social climbing. He had learned about her engagement through casual conversation and had felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. When Alexander had seen the wedding announcement in the society pages, he had felt compelled to come, though he couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was something deeper that he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Now, watching Emma's world collapse in front of 200 witnesses, Alexander felt a surge of protective anger toward the coward who had abandoned her. He had built his business empire by making quick decisions and taking calculated risks, and something about this moment called for immediate action. Alexander stood up from his seat in the back of the church, his tall frame and expensive suit drawing attention as he began walking down the aisle. The guests turned to watch this unexpected development, whispers following in his wake as he approached the altar with determined steps. Emma, still crying and clutching David's letter, looked up in confusion as this stranger approached. She recognized him vaguely as a customer from her shop, but couldn't understand why he was walking toward her during the most humiliating moment of her life. Chapter 4. The Impossible Proposal. Alexander reached the altar and stood directly in front of Emma, his dark eyes meeting her tear-filled gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. The entire church fell silent, everyone straining to hear what this mysterious man would say to the abandoned bride. "Miss Park," Alexander said, his voice clear and confident despite the unusual circumstances, "I know this is unexpected, but I have a proposition for you." Emma stared at him in bewilderment, still clutching David's letter and trying to process what was happening. Sarah moved protectively closer to her friend, eyeing Alexander with suspicion. "You don't deserve to be humiliated like this," Alexander continued, his voice carrying to the back of the church. "You're a remarkable woman who deserves better than a man who lacks the courage to face you with his doubts." The congregation was completely silent now, captivated by this unprecedented turn of events. Emma's mother had risen from her seat, her face a mixture of confusion and hope. Alexander took a step closer to Emma, his expression serious but gentle. "I'm proposing a solution that could benefit both of us. Marry me instead." The words hung in the air like a challenge to reality itself. Emma felt as if the world had tilted on its axis, and she couldn't be sure she had heard correctly. "I know this sounds crazy," Alexander continued, "but hear me out. You have a wedding planned, guests assembled, and a beautiful ceremony prepared. I have reasons of my own for needing a wife, business reasons that require the stability of marriage." Emma found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I don't even know you." "You know I respect your work and your character," Alexander replied. "I've been a customer at your shop, and I've seen how you treat people with kindness and professionalism. That's more than many marriages start with." The audacity of his proposal was breathtaking, but something in his eyes told Emma that he was completely serious. This wasn't a joke or a moment of misguided chivalry. This was a genuine offer from a man who seemed to understand exactly what he was suggesting. Chapter 5. A Moment of Decision. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process Alexander's incredible offer. The practical part of her brain cataloged the impossibility of the situation. She barely knew this man, had never even had a real conversation with him beyond business transactions at her flower shop. But another part of her, the part that was wounded and humiliated and desperate to salvage something from this disaster, found herself actually considering his proposal. The alternative was to send 200 guests home, cancel the reception, and face months of pitying looks and whispered conversations about the bride who was abandoned at the altar. Sarah leaned close to Emma's ear. "You don't have to do anything right now. We can just end the ceremony and deal with everything later." Emma looked out at the assembled guests, many of whom had traveled great distances and taken time off work to celebrate what they thought would be the happiest day of her life. Her elderly grandmother sat in the front row, having flown in from Korea despite her fear of flying. Her college friends had come from different states, and her business associates had closed their shops to attend. Alexander seemed to sense her internal struggle. "I understand this is overwhelming," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that my offer is genuine. I'm not asking for a real marriage in the traditional sense. This would be a partnership, a business arrangement that could benefit both of us." "What kind of business arrangement?" Emma asked, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. "I need a wife for certain social and business obligations. My company is expanding internationally, and there are cultural expectations in some markets that favor married executives. You need to salvage your dignity from this situation and perhaps gain some financial security in the process." Emma's practical mind began to engage despite the emotional chaos. Alexander Kim was known throughout Seattle as a successful and honorable businessman. His company had an excellent reputation, and she had never heard any negative gossip about his personal character. "If I said yes," Emma said slowly, "what exactly would you expect from this arrangement?" Alexander's expression remained serious and respectful. "A marriage certificate, public appearances when necessary, and mutual respect. Nothing more than you're comfortable with." Chapter 6. The Leap of Faith. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center herself in the midst of the most surreal moment of her life. When she opened them again, she found Alexander still watching her with patient intensity, waiting for her decision without pressure or urgency. The silence in the church was deafening. Emma could hear her own heartbeat and the soft rustle of fabric as guests shifted in their seats. Reverend Williams stood nearby, clearly uncertain about how to proceed with this unprecedented situation. Emma thought about David's letter, still crumpled in her hand. 3 years of her life, months of wedding planning, and dreams of a future together had been casually discarded with a few hastily written sentences. The man she had thought she loved had chosen the coward's way out, leaving her to face the consequences of his decision alone. But Alexander Kim was offering her something different. Not love, perhaps, but respect and partnership. He was willing to stand beside her in front of all these people and make a commitment, even if it wasn't the traditional romantic commitment she had dreamed of. "You would really do this?" Emma asked, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. "You would marry a woman you barely know to help her save face?" "I would marry a woman I respect to help us both achieve our goals," Alexander corrected gently. "This isn't charity, Emma. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement between two adults who understand what they're agreeing to." Emma looked at Sarah, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Her best friend gave her a small nod, as if to say that the decision was entirely hers to make. Emma turned back to Alexander and made the most impulsive decision of her carefully planned life. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll marry you." A collective gasp rose from the congregation, followed by excited murmurs as the news spread through the pews. Alexander smiled for the first time since approaching the altar, and Emma felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Reverend Williams stepped forward, clearly struggling to adapt to the situation. "Are you both certain about this decision?" Chapter 7. The Unexpected Ceremony. Reverend Williams, despite his obvious confusion about the unprecedented situation, agreed to proceed with the ceremony after confirming that both Emma and Alexander were serious about their decision. The minister had known Emma's family for years and could see that she was making a rational choice rather than acting out of pure emotion. Alexander produced a simple platinum band from his jacket pocket, explaining quietly that he always carried it as a reminder of his commitment to eventually marry for practical rather than romantic reasons. The ring fit Emma's finger perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the guests had ever witnessed. Instead of traditional vows about love and devotion, Emma and Alexander spoke honestly about their commitment to respect and support each other in their new partnership. Their words were carefully chosen and surprisingly moving in their sincerity. "I promise to honor our agreement and treat you with the respect you deserve," Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "I promise to be a partner worthy of your trust and to approach this marriage with honesty and integrity," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. When Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander leaned forward and placed a gentle, respectful kiss on Emma's cheek rather than her lips. The gesture was appropriate for their arrangement while still acknowledging the significance of the moment. The congregation erupted in applause, though Emma could see confusion and curiosity on many faces. Her mother was crying, though whether from relief, joy, or bewilderment was unclear. Sarah was beaming with what looked like genuine happiness for her friend's unexpected turn of fortune. As they walked back down the aisle together, Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions. The day had been nothing like she had planned, but somehow she felt more hopeful than she had in months. Alexander's presence beside her was steady and reassuring, and she found herself believing that this unexpected partnership might actually work. Chapter 8. The Reception Revelation. The wedding reception at the Grand Hyatt Seattle proceeded as planned, though with an atmosphere of curiosity and excitement that was quite different from what Emma had originally envisioned. Alexander proved to be a gracious host, moving through the crowd with the social skills of someone accustomed to corporate events and high-stakes business dinners. Emma watched in amazement as her new husband effortlessly charmed her relatives and friends. He spoke knowledgeably with her uncle about the flower business, discussed travel with her college friends, and even managed to make her elderly grandmother laugh with his attempts at Korean phrases. During the traditional first dance, Alexander held Emma respectfully and led her through a simple waltz while the guests watched with fascination. "You're handling this remarkably well," he murmured as they moved across the dance floor. "I'm still not entirely sure this is real," Emma admitted, looking up at his face and trying to reconcile this kind, attentive man with the distant customer she had known from her flower shop. "It's real," Alexander assured her. "And I want you to know that I meant everything I said at the altar. This marriage may have started unconventionally, but I intend to honor our agreement completely." As the evening progressed, Emma began to see different facets of Alexander's personality. He was clearly intelligent and successful, but he also showed genuine interest in other people and seemed to remember details from conversations with her family members. Several guests commented to Emma about how lucky she was to have found such a considerate husband. Emma's mother pulled her aside during the cake cutting. "I don't understand exactly what happened today," she said quietly, "but I can see that this man respects you. Sometimes that's more important than passion." The words resonated with Emma as she watched Alexander interact with her wedding guests. David had claimed to love her, but he had shown her no respect when he abandoned her at the altar. Alexander was offering her something different, partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. As the reception wound down, Emma realized that she was actually looking forward to learning more about the man she had just married. Chapter 9. The New Reality. 3 days after their unexpected wedding, Emma found herself standing in the lobby of Alexander's downtown Seattle penthouse, holding a single suitcase and trying to process the dramatic changes in her life. The apartment was everything she had expected from a successful CEO, modern, elegant, and intimidating in its perfection. Alexander had given her time to pack her belongings and say goodbye to her small apartment above the flower shop. He had also insisted that she continue running her business exactly as before, making it clear that their marriage was not meant to change her professional independence. "I've prepared the guest bedroom for you," Alexander said, as he showed her around the spacious apartment. "You'll have complete privacy and your own bathroom. I travel frequently for business, so you'll often have the place to yourself." The guest room was larger than Emma's entire previous apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Alexander had thoughtfully arranged for fresh flowers, white roses and eucalyptus that he must have ordered from her shop. "Thank you," Emma said, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted you to feel welcome here," Alexander replied simply. "This is your home now, for as long as our arrangement continues." Over the following weeks, Emma and Alexander settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. They shared breakfast most mornings, discussing their respective schedules and current events. Alexander proved to be an excellent cook and often prepared dinner when he wasn't traveling for business. Emma continued running her flower shop, but she noticed an increase in high-end corporate clients who seemed to know about her connection to Alexander. He never directly sent business her way, but his reputation appeared to be opening doors that had previously been closed to her small operation. In the evenings, they often sat together in Alexander's study, Emma working on floral designs, while Alexander reviewed business documents. Their conversations gradually became more personal as they learned about each other's backgrounds, dreams, and disappointments. Emma discovered that Alexander had built his company from nothing after immigrating from South Korea as a teenager, and that his drive for success was motivated by a desire to prove himself in a country that had initially seen him as an outsider. Chapter 10. Growing Understanding. 2 months into their marriage, Emma began to understand the depth of Alexander's character in ways that surprised her. She had expected him to be cold and calculating, focused solely on business success, but she discovered a man who was thoughtful, generous, and surprisingly vulnerable beneath his professional exterior. Alexander's business trips often took him to Asia, where his company was expanding rapidly. He always brought Emma small gifts from his travels, not expensive jewelry or luxury items, but thoughtful tokens that showed he had been thinking of her. A book of Korean poetry, a silk scarf in her favorite color, or specialty tea from a market in Seoul. Emma found herself looking forward to his return from these trips, enjoying their conversations about his work and the different cultures he encountered. She began to understand the pressure he faced as a Korean-American CEO in a competitive industry, and the loneliness that had driven him to seek a marriage of convenience. "Why did you really propose to me that day?" Emma asked one evening as they shared dinner on the apartment's terrace overlooking the city. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Honestly, I couldn't stand watching you be humiliated by someone who didn't deserve you. But it was also selfish. I saw an opportunity to solve my own problem while helping you solve yours." "What problem?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Loneliness," Alexander admitted. "I've been successful in business, but I've never been successful at personal relationships. I thought a marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals might be more sustainable than one based on emotion alone." Emma understood his reasoning better than she cared to admit. Her relationship with David had been built on romantic feelings that had ultimately proved fragile when tested by real-world pressures. "Do you think we're succeeding?" Emma asked. "At this partnership, I mean." Alexander smiled, and Emma realized it was the first completely genuine smile she had seen from him. "I think we're succeeding beyond my expectations. You've made this apartment feel like a home, and you've made me remember what it's like to have someone to share my day with." Emma felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine they were sharing and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. Chapter 11. Unexpected Feelings. 6 months after their wedding, Emma realized that her feelings for Alexander had evolved far beyond the practical partnership they had originally agreed upon. She found herself missing him when he traveled, looking forward to their evening conversations, and feeling genuinely happy when he smiled at something she said. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Their marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement, a mutually beneficial partnership that would eventually end when their respective goals had been achieved. Emma had never expected to develop real feelings for her husband of convenience. Alexander seemed to be experiencing a similar evolution in his feelings, though he was characteristically careful about expressing them. Emma noticed that he found excuses to spend more time at home, that his business trips became shorter and less frequent, and that he looked at her with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. One evening, as they worked together in Alexander's study, Emma accidentally knocked over a glass of water, soaking some important business documents. She immediately began apologizing and trying to salvage the papers, but Alexander gently took her hands to stop her frantic efforts. "Emma," he said softly, "it's just paper. It doesn't matter." The way he said her name and the way he was looking at her made Emma's heart race. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she realized that she wanted him to. But Alexander released her hands and stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "I'll print new copies tomorrow," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Emma felt a pang of disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. She was falling in love with her husband, and she had no idea if he felt the same way or if he was determined to keep their relationship within the boundaries they had originally established. The uncertainty was becoming harder to bear with each passing day. But Emma was afraid to risk their comfortable partnership by admitting her changing feelings. Chapter 12. Love Revealed. The turning point came on a rainy November evening when Alexander returned early from a business trip to find Emma in the kitchen, crying over a phone call from her mother. Emma's grandmother, who had attended their wedding despite her fear of flying, had suffered a stroke and was in the hospital in Korea. Without hesitation, Alexander wrapped his arms around Emma and held her while she cried. "We'll go to Korea tomorrow," he said firmly. "I'll arrange everything." "We?" Emma asked, looking up at him through her tears. "Of course we," Alexander replied. "She's your grandmother, which makes her my family too." The next 24 hours revealed the depth of Alexander's feelings for Emma in ways that words never could. He canceled important meetings, arranged for private medical transport, and accompanied Emma to Seoul without a single complaint about the disruption to his schedule. At the hospital, Alexander served as translator and advocate, using his business connections to ensure Emma's grandmother received the best possible care. He slept in uncomfortable hospital chairs and brought Emma meals when she refused to leave her grandmother's bedside. On the third night, as they sat together in the hospital waiting room, Emma finally found the courage to address the elephant in the room. "Alexander, I need to tell you something. This marriage stopped being just a business arrangement for me months ago." Alexander turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent hospital lighting. "For me, too," he admitted quietly. "I think I started falling in love with you the day I watched you arrange flowers in your shop, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." "What does this mean for us?" Emma asked, her heart pounding. "It means," Alexander said, reaching for her hand, "that I'd like to try being married for real if you're willing. Not because of business obligations or social expectations, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Emma's grandmother recovered fully from her stroke, and at her insistence, Emma and Alexander had a traditional Korean wedding ceremony in Seoul before returning to Seattle. This time, when they exchanged vows, they spoke of love, devotion, and the unexpected journey that had brought them together. A year later, as Emma arranged flowers for another bride in her expanded shop, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had led her to true love. David's abandonment, which had seemed like the end of her world, had actually been the beginning of something far more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. Dear viewers, we hope Emma and Alexander's beautiful love story has touched your hearts and reminded you that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most wonderful endings. Their journey shows us that love can grow from respect and partnership, and that the courage to take a leap of faith can change everything. If this K-drama-inspired tale moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more romantic stories that celebrate the power of love to heal, transform, and surprise us when we least expect it. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey.